Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruver. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I am Kathy Gruver, and we are so excited to be back with you. Hey, Jason, there's a lot of people, we're starting out a new year. There's a lot of people trying to lose weight. It's their resolution. People are fasting, doing all the thing. One thing that doesn't help us lose weight?
What's that?
Jumping to conclusions.
What?
I know.
You mean if I just stand here and jump to a bunch of conclusions, I'm not going to lose a bunch of weight?
The jumping's going to help.
If I actually physically jumped,
yeah,
right?
That'll be okay, like with a rope or something. But no, just assuming things. We know what happens when we assume. So today we thought we'd talk about that, jumping to conclusions, making assumptions, reactivity and communication, because all that's going to get you in trouble, and that's not good for relationships, communication, business, leadership, any of those things. So we thought we'd do that today.
Yeah, because I think, as we were talking about that before we hit record, it's, how many times have you done something or said something or somebody else has said something and you just jump to a conclusion and you have all these stories, right, around what you think the person is meaning. And most of the time it has nothing to do with what they were actually meaning, right? Yeah. But how much of the time, do we get ourselves in trouble because we react instead of responding? And we've talked about that before, but let's talk about it, because especially, as it comes to communication, we find ourselves doing this all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Somebody says something, you feel a little triggered, and all of a sudden you start making a whole bunch of interpretations about what you think the person said, right? Yeah. And most of the time it's that mirror back on us, right? Where our insecurities or whatever else is coming up and probably has nothing to do with what's actually going on, right? Yeah. So what are some ways that we can kind of curb this, if you will?
Well, one of the things we've talked about before is taking that pause. Like taking that stop for a second and actually getting curious and asking yourself, why do they say that? What's behind that? What do they maybe know that I don't? I see this so often in corporations. I'm sure you've seen this too, where, the higher ups make a decision, but don't give the whys. I'm all about the whys. And the people that then have to execute that don't understand. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to be on board because they don't understand the whys of that. So weird example, but I was heading to get my colonoscopy. And one of the things it said was, no, because as you do.
We're to that age, right? So anyway.
And one of the things it said was, don't have alcohol. And not that I need alcohol, but I was like, I wonder why. And I got really curious about that. And when the nurse called and said, do you have any questions? And I said, hey, so I have a weird question. I said, I'm not going to get bombed before my colonoscopy, but I noticed in the instructions it said, don't drink alcohol. Now, red wine, that makes sense. You don't want to have that because you can't have anything red. I said, but why would you want people to not drink alcohol? She said, that's a really great question. She said, the stuff that we give you to drink that makes you is very dehydrating. People tend to not drink enough water with that. She said, and then they drink alcohol, which is dehydrating. Then they come in for the treatment and they're a little loopy and it's not as comfortable and And I went, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. I didn't have alcohol. I didn't want it anyway, but I wanted to know why. So rather than somebody going, oh, it's stupid and drinking anyway, and then getting themselves in trouble, I got curious and said, well, I wonder why that's the case. They must have a reason for it, or they wouldn't have put it in the instructions. And I think we need to ask more questions. I think we need to get curious rather than getting reactive. And if we can do that, then we're going to be ahead of the game.
Well, and that's good where, one of the things that I teach people a lot too is to ask questions, right? To be curious. And there's nothing wrong with being curious, right? In fact, we should be curious because at that point we're not jumping to some of these conclusions. We're not, placing judgment on something. And so, one thing like that, if somebody says something and you're like, what the fuck, sort of thing, right? Before you jump to what the fuck, what if you said, I'm curious what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Or I'm curious why you would say that, right? That's a simple clarifying question. It does a couple things. It forces you into that pause, right?
Mhm.
Because by the time you ask that question, you're already pausing. So you're getting past that 7-second, reactive time, subconscious to conscious, but also you're allowing people to kind of explain what it is that they're saying so that you can get more context as to what they actually meant by that, right?
Well, and that's a great point, because I have coaching clients that they'll go off about how they can't stand that their mother does da 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 da. Well, I'm not coaching their mother, and they're welcome to spend their time complaining for 10 or 15 minutes about what their mother does that doesn't actually affect them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things like, she wants to put money in the stock market. That's just stupid. And I don't know why she does that. And then she tells me about it, and I don't care. They'll do something like that. It's not an actual example, of course. And I said, why does that bother you so much? And they stops them in their tracks and they go, well, I don't know. I said, well, let's think about that. Like, this is clearly triggering you in some way. So the fact that your mom is doing stuff in the stock market, why does that bother you so much? And they've never considered that. They've never thought about, why am I constantly complaining about this thing? They haven't considered the reasons for that. And maybe it's they're jealous that she has the money. Maybe they lost money in the stock market. I mean, there's so many different reasons. And I think that kind of brings me to my next tip with this is explore other options. What else might be happening in this situation that maybe you're not privy to? I had a client come flying into my office years ago. She was clearly in a bad mood. I said, what's going on? She said, I waved to my friend at the gym and she didn't wave back. And I was like, is it 1986? Like, are we kids? Like, did we go back in time to high
High
school?
school never ends, right?
He said, hi. I was like, whoa. And I said, okay, well, what happened? She goes, well, I was pulling out of the parking lot and she came out of the gym and I waved and she looked at me but didn't wave back. She obviously doesn't like me. I mean, like, that was the conclusion she jumped to. And I said, okay, well, what maybe could have been the other explanation? She doesn't like me. And that's all she could come up with. She couldn't get out of that loop to consider something else. And I said, okay, maybe she didn't see you. She wasn't wearing her glasses. Maybe she just had a really bad workout. She hurt herself and she doesn't feel good. Maybe she had a really great workout, was distracted. Maybe she had her earbuds in and she was on her phone. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe you mistook who that was. So there's all these other reasons that she might not have waved to you. Does she not like you? I don't know. Unless you ask her, you're not going to know either. You can put that in your head, or you can explore these other options. And this is why I love debating, not yelling and screaming and arguing, but debating with people that have different views than me, because I want my brain to be opened up to different possibilities and different viewpoints. And that takes patience and non-reactivity and open-mindedness and curiosity. And these are traits that we want to have. These are traits that are going to serve us in our lives and businesses and relationships. So, but it was just interesting. She could not come up with any other reason of why this woman wouldn't have waved back. And it was baffling to me that she couldn't remove herself from that hurt. Clearly that hurt of maybe not being accepted or not being liked. And she got stuck in that, like 10th grade loop of she waved at me.
Well, and I think it's funny because actually, it goes in line with one of the things I teach people, which I call it the 7 stories, which is, putting a number on it, come up with 7 other alternative stories or 7 other
nice.
Right ways of thinking about it. Because and why the number 7? It's a good number. Right?
Alliteration.
Well, it's more just because exactly what you were talking about with your client. Usually we can come up with 2 or 3 pretty easily, but chances are those 2 or 3 that we kind of knee-jerk react to are stories that don't serve us. They're just reinforcing how we want to feel, right? So your client, for whatever reason, wanted to feel hurt. I don't know why, right? But again, I mean, that gets into some deeper stuff. And so the only things that she could come up with, the couple that she could come up with, were things that, reinforced how she was choosing to feel. But when you get to 7, if you kind of force yourself to go to 7, all of a sudden you're going to open up some of these other possibilities that you never considered before, where normally you might stop after 2 or 3. And so, again, like you kind of went through with her, maybe she had a good workout, maybe she was hurt, maybe she was whatever, right? Maybe the sun was shining on your car window and she couldn't tell who was in there. She didn't even see that anybody was waving, right?
Right.
I mean, there's all these other things. And the one thing that I love to do with that is, write down what those stories are, pick the one that makes you feel the best.
Mhm.
Right. So
I love that. Yeah.
choose to believe the story that's going to serve you the best.
Right.
So, that's going to get you to a different emotional state. Again, if you don't want to feel hurt and left out and rejected, then pick a story and choose to believe that story that's going to help you, move on. Right.
Yeah.
You probably just didn't see me. Not a big deal. Nothing personal. Right. And get her to a different emotional state.
We take everything so personally, and I'm guilty of that too. I mean, how often has like our partner come home in a bad mood and our first thought is, are you mad at me? What did I do?
Well,
Did I do something wrong? I mean,
that's where I tend to go is, did I do something wrong? Right. Like that little Jason ego state comes out like, oh, has Jason been a bad boy? Did I do something I didn't mean to do? Did I? Right. And so it's times like that where I don't want to feel like that little boy who's in trouble.
Right.
I'm a grown-ass man, right?
Right.
So I should instead pick some other story that's going to serve me better.
Yeah.
Right? Because it, like we've said before too, right? All stories are not true. So just pick the story. If we know that all these different stories probably are not true, then at least pick a story that makes you feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of thinking about it. And if here's another quandary. What if it's something that really doesn't have anything to do with you? So I'm running for a board of an organization, and so I'm getting to see how the sausage is made. It's not pretty, as it never is, right? And
Teddy Roosevelt, you never want to see how sausage or politics are made.
Yeah, it's political, and it's surprising to me the reactivity of some of the folks in this organization, not in the board itself, but sort of like just in the membership at large, where they'll read one little thing and they'll plant that and it'll sprout into and the next thing you know, the people in charge are having to waste all this time putting out these fires because people read one thing, and rather than waiting for more information, asking for more information, getting curious, saying, oh, this thing was approved, great, let's wait and see what happens with that. They get so reactive. And then what they do is they spit it up all over social media, which causes all this conflict, all these hurt feelings. I heard the and it's like, oh my God. And I don't know how to encourage everybody to take a pause, take a step back, breathe for a second, and not be so reactive to this stuff. And I'm really hoping to be on the board, and I'm hoping to make a difference. And one of the things that I have an ask for the membership is calm down. Please
calm down and listen to this episode.
Yeah, don't, as my mother would say, don't go off half cocked. Because we do that, we get one little piece of 30 pieces of information and we think that's the truth and that we can run with that. And and then there's this hive mind of, and then it grows this horrible game of telephone where suddenly, everything's on fire when all we did was buy a pack of matches. And it's fascinating for me to watch how quickly that grows and spreads, that misinformation or disinformation or whatever we want to call it.
Well, because like you said, it starts to compound on itself, right? And again, as humans, we like to think of it, everything as linear, but everything is not linear. Everything is causal loop, network architecture kind of stuff. And we won't get into all the details on that in this episode because we can spend a whole episode on that. But each of those particular events can either accelerate or decelerate, right? What happens. And so again, maybe here's another tip for people is in that kind of a situation, don't pass it on, right? Is that if you feel triggered in that, if you pass that on, right, to somebody else, if you post on social media about it, if you get pissy and grumpy about it and start bitching and moaning to your friends about it, then all of a sudden what it does is that energy then flows into them as well. And what you're doing is you're accelerating that.
Yeah.
And we see this so much, in emotional states that we're in, right? You're feeling all happy and everything is great. And then your friend comes along and bitches and moans at you. And all of a sudden, they tend to pull you down into that depression or sadness that they're in,
Yeah.
instead of you staying up at that other, higher emotional state where you were, right? So one thing is, don't pass it on, because it's going to end up making it worse for everybody else. And just, have the courage to just, it stops here.
Right.
Right.
And that's so interesting, because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, why? What is the appeal of passing that on? Well, I think it's ego. Oh, I heard this thing first. Let me tell everybody. There's something to be said for being the first to spew that information out. And I think people like to stir the pot.
Mhm.
I think the rebel comes out, or they're, excuse me, some ego state is like they feel rewarded for, I'm going to tell everybody what's happening. And I heard this thing and I want to let everyone know. And, I think there's a reward base to that, at least in their own thing, or maybe in the group. Oh, did you hear what Julie said everybody was doing? And, she told us that, so she's she's the one that is in the know. And, I read it first. I want to tell everybody. I think there's a reward for that somehow. I mean, that's the only thing that would make sense, or else you'd read that and go, oh, interesting. Let's see what happens with that.
Well, there is, and that's where, because as you're talking, right, that there are different people who do like to stir the pot, right? I prefer to watch my drama on TV and leave it out of my life, right? That's just my take on it, right? So I don't want the drama. I don't need it. I try to stop it or ignore it and go, oh, that's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who like to stir the pot, who like to try to get other people in trouble. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, as you were talking, it reminded me of one of my kids who always loved to tattletale on the other kids. Right. There was just something about in her personality that she liked to watch other people get in trouble. Right. Which is kind of sick in some ways. But anyway, it's, there's people
That'll
that
be
are
our
just,
next episode.
yeah, there's some people that are just that way. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And even if there's, nothing malicious about it, sometimes these things are just done subconsciously. We don't even realize we're doing it.
Sure.
But that's why too, there's that whole saying, misery loves company.
Yeah.
As well, right? That so much of the time when we're hurting, when we're feeling whatever, we want the other people around us to feel that too. But we shouldn't pass it on. Right. It's one of those things that takes courage for us to stop and not pass it on to other people.
Well, and what I was thinking about as you said that is, okay, so let's say you read something, in the minutes of the board meeting and you go, oh my God, I feel threatened by this. You want to mount an army to support your position, right? So I can see why somebody would read that and go, oh, I don't like that. And then they share it with everybody in hopes of getting enough people on board that then that gets fought.
Mhm.
So that might be part of it too, is you're preemptively mounting a strike, except the problem is nothing was threatening. It was simply a line in a thing that something was approved, nothing happened, and it goes along with that reactivity, but then also that I need people on my side. It's that I need to be accepted thing. So let me get people on my side, even if the information's wrong. Sounds like that could be a thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely is for some people. Right.
Yeah.
But again, it's for everybody listening, right? You get to decide, you get to choose what you're going to do.
Yep.
Are you going to be that person that, goes into something uninformed because you reacted, you jumped to some conclusion and potentially find out later you were totally wrong? Or would you rather get some clarity, respond up front, later on? Because again, maybe there is something to it. You find out a little bit more information and you're like, oh my gosh, yep, something is not right here.
Yeah.
Then you want to mount the troops, and get everybody ready to try to make a change. But so much of the time, it usually doesn't even matter.
Exactly. So let me throw a scenario by you since we're having this conversation. So what if you want more information? You want to be curious. You read this one thing and go, holy shit, what are they doing with that? And no one will give you information. I have a client whose boss will say things like, make the report better.
But not say how to make it better.
Right. What does that mean? Does that mean a bigger font? Does that mean puppets? Does that mean colored graphs? What does that? What does make it better
puppets
mean?
and colored graphs would
Yeah.
make it better, right?
Makes everything better, right? So, this, and we figured it out, but it's like this woman was, trapped in this company with bosses that didn't want to communicate, with people that would give vague information. And she felt so stuck because she wanted to be better and she wanted information and she couldn't get any. So what do we do with that situation?
Well, that's one where it's I was actually just having a discussion with a client about a similar kind of thing where, performance had been great the whole year, come into the year end discussion, and there was some generic thing about, yeah, but what did you do? Right? Your team did this, but what did you do? Right? So he was kind of feeling like, what do you mean? My team is me, right? I mean, we did all of these things, right? And I think, sometimes when people don't give information like that, right? If you're being curious, you're trying to ask for some sort of feedback that you can actually do something about. There's probably a couple of reasons, and at least from a leadership perspective, there's the one that I see most of the time, which is the person doesn't know. They don't know. That's why they're not giving you an answer.
Yeah.
Like in this instance, we figured out it really is probably, I don't know if this person's boss just got laid into by their boss, or sometimes there's always this feeling like, well, whatever you're doing, it's not good enough, so you got to improve. I don't know what it is, but you got to do it better, right? And so much of the time when people won't give you a response, it's typically because they don't know or they don't understand.
Yeah.
You'll see this a lot of times when people will talk about something. We see this as speakers sometimes, right? Where somebody will be, there'll be a speaker, they've recorded their speech, and then somebody asks them a question and they don't really give them an answer. And a lot of times it's because they don't know the answer.
Yeah.
They don't know the answer, but they don't have the courage to say, you know what, that is a really good question. I'm not quite sure. Let me get back to you on that.
Yeah. Which is what I know you and I do. It's like I've had people ask me a question where I kind of start to answer it, and then I realize I actually don't have the answer to that. I did an ego state talk in Chicago, and somebody asked me a really good question. Even I went, wow, that's a great question. Had no idea what the answer was.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of I didn't dance around an answer, but, I told them what I knew, what I thought about that position. And then I went, and ultimately that's a great question. I don't fully know an answer to that. I said, let me think about that. Let me shoot you an email. Let me connect you with someone that would know. Let me refer you to a book. There's options to that other than not giving an answer at all. And we see this in politics all the time. People give non-answers all the time. I mean, that's their job, is to give non-answers. But yeah, so interesting.
Yeah, at least that's been my experience. Usually is people they don't have the courage to admit that they don't know. And so they usually try to deflect, give a non-answer, do something like that, which again, it's frustrating for the person, because again, like your client, well, what does it mean to make the report better? I want to do better.
Right.
What is it? And again, I mean, a lot of times if you try to ask follow-up questions and you're just getting dodged, then what I typically do is, well, they really don't know what they want, so I'm just going to keep doing what I'm going to do. At some point, maybe they're going to figure it out and they'll give me some more constructive, concrete things that I can do something about. If not, then I'm just going to ignore it and I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. And most of the time when you do that, it becomes a non-issue, right? They felt like they had to say something.
That's a good point.
And okay, you said it, great, right? And now I'm just going to go about my merry business, and chances are you're never going to follow back up with me, because it wasn't really that big a deal anyway, and there was no substance behind the comment.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah, I mean, you can't measure that. Oh, good, you made it better. I didn't change anything. We've all seen that too, where it's like, make these, change something, and then you don't change it. They're like, oh, this is so much better. You're like, it's the exact same thing I just gave you. Yeah, cool, great. So yeah, taking a pause, trying not to jump to conclusions, getting curious. And I love the 7 stories idea. That's really great.
Yeah, just, you know, it forces you, putting a number out there just forces you to try to get outside of your comfort zone of the first knee-jerk couple of things that come to mind. Because when you get to that fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh one, it's usually a completely different view of the world than you went into it as you were triggered.
I love that. Anything we can do to expand our minds, because once you stretch it out, you can't go back. Can't go back to little. So
That's nice.
great.
We're like,
yeah,
the
I
balloon.
know. I love it. I love it. All right. Cool.
Balloons, puppets, colored charts,
jump rope,
all make things better.
Yeah. Obvious. And wine.
And
wine. Colonoscopies.
And colonoscopies too.
You do lose weight. Getting
Yeah, but we're not putting out any medical advice. We would not encourage anyone to lose weight by having multiple colonoscopies.
I don't think they let you do that. We do encourage you to get everything checked to make sure you don't have cancer. We do encourage that.
Yep.
And what a great place to leave it. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. So let's try to be not as reactive. Take a pause, get curious, try to tell those 7 stories. It's great. Cool. How can people find you, Jason?
I can be reached at jasonmefford.com.
Cool. I can be reached at kathygruver.com.
All right. And with that, everybody, go out, have a great rest of your week. Don't jump to conclusions. And we'll catch you on a future episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. See ya.
See ya.